Welcome to the Human Factors and Ergonomics Hub, a series of educational podcasts that showcase the connection between human capabilities and good work design, brought to you by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society of Australia. Hi and welcome to the HFESA podcast here on the HFE Hub. Today our podcast is brought to you by Kath Jones. Kath holds qualifications in psychology and occupational therapy and has been an active member of the HFESA for more than 15 years. Today she's chatting to Professor Tim Bentley, who presented at the HFESA conference in 2018 in Perth. The HFESA conference this year will be held in Brisbane from November the 25th to the 27th. So don't forget to log on to the website now for more information at hfesa.au.
So hello and welcome to this episode of the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society podcast. Today we're recording this podcast on Noongar Boodja land on the west coast, and we acknowledge the Whadjuk people who are the traditional custodians of the land, and we recognise their continued connection to the land and waters of this beautiful place and acknowledge that they never ceded sovereignty. It's the Noongar season of Makaroo, which is when we see the first heavy rains. And I'm here with Professor Tim Bentley on a cold and rainy day here in Perth. Welcome, Tim.
We've seen that rain.
We have. They were right
Kath.
about that. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me today.
Okay.
Tim, you're currently the director of the Massey Centre.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Okay, so the Mars Centre is the Mental Awareness, Respect and Safety Centre, named, of course, after the programme of which it's part. It's a collaboration between the West Australian Government, DMIRS, and ECU, and of course industry, who we work quite closely with as part of this programme. So it came about around about this time last year, or sometime before this time last year. We applied for a grant to establish a professorial chair in mining work, health and safety. It was open to all Western Australian universities. Myself and a colleague, Professor Ben Walton, put in a proposal. In our proposal, we felt that we would, to make this as sustainable as possible and to have, I guess, the maximum impact, we thought we'd put together a centre rather than just putting up a person. And so we put together the Mars Centre. This came out of the Centre for Work and Wellbeing that we'd already established at ECU and had been working predominantly with other sectors. We had done a little bit of work in mining, but most of it, if I'm honest, was in public sector. But it had enabled us to develop and test a number of solutions to, particularly to psychosocial problems. We'd also, within the centre, had quite a lot of people with a long experience working with different industries, including mining, and a real multidisciplinary sort of mix of talent from including sort of work, health and safety, some human factors people, epidemiologists, and a whole bunch of people working what I generally call in that wellbeing and psychosocial risk field. So we thought our best bet was to put ourselves forward as a centre, and we did. And fortunately, we were successful, and that gave rise to the centre, which started on the 1st of July. The funding was approved, I think, in June, and we started on the 1st of July. Much to our surprise, it started so quickly, and so we hit the ground running from a standing start, and here we are nearly a year later, I think starting to do some good work, and I guess we're going to talk a bit about that, but that's the sort of genesis of it. We've got 25 active researchers in the centre. Only 5 or 6 of us are sort of core funded within it. The rest are talented academics who give a proportion of their time to do research and teaching and so on in there. If I can say a little bit about the programme, just in a few sentences. The first thing is we have a teaching programme, and I think that's the thing that DMIRS and the Mars programme principally wanted from us. So looking across the mining sector, we worked out there was a relatively low level of tertiary education there, and particularly at the postgrad level. But it was difficult because there were such relatively low levels of undergraduate qualification even. It was difficult to get people postgraduate educated. So we came up with a scheme for a graduate certificate that would include a mix of work health and safety, the psychosocial stuff, the healthy work stuff, and the respect at work stuff. In response, of course, to the Another Is Enough report and all the research that we know about that points to that as a problem. So there were 3 units that broadly covered these issues, as well as leadership, and we wanted a thread of leadership to go through that, so that runs through all the programs. All the units. And we came up with this very innovative program, which we launched earlier this year, and is now in the last of the 3 units. The first 2 units are run. Seems to be very successful. Demir's kindly provided funding for scholarships, 50% scholarships, which we were given 30 for this year, and I think we've given away 29 as of now. So, and we've still got another semester to run. But so it seems like there's interest in this, and it's meeting a need. So those people, even if they don't have an undergraduate degree, if they've worked in the sector for 5 years and they're currently working in the sector, they qualify for a scholarship and also entry to the program. And we've designed this to help meet our grand mission, I suppose, of the centre is to elevate mining sector work health and safety capabilities. And so education program obviously needs to be part of that. We've also got an undergraduate minor. They're both got similar names, but they're around leading workplace safety in the mining sector. We've got an undergraduate minor as well, and we're also developing short courses that we hope to start offering later this year or early next year. Our research program is now well underway. A third of the income we get from the government we put into research. So we've got 9 projects ongoing at the moment on a mix of topics. I'm happy to talk about those a bit more later on if you like. But they're broadly addressing the 3 overarching Mars priority areas: creating mentally healthy work, building a culture of safety and respect, and ensuring safety in future mining. So that's that sort of future work piece. Very exciting. Lots of human factors interest in what we're doing, obviously, or rather, I should say, sort of input. A lot of these are, from my point of view, human factors and ergonomics problems, and we're trying to address it from everything we do, from that sort of systems approach. Most of the team aren't educated in human factors and ergonomics. In fact, while we have some expertise within our people who generally are in the work health and safety area, I think I'm the only person that's got postgrad qualifications in that. But we do have other people such as Carlo Caponecchia, who spoke at the event we held recently on managing psychosocial risks, that work closely with us, and that's sort of how we're dealing with that. So, yeah, and I guess the rest of what we do is all around engagement, working with industry, getting to know them, sort of meeting with them, explaining what it is we do and what our goals are, what our research is about, and how that feeds into our teaching, and understanding, most importantly, what their needs are and how, where they see the greatest challenges, and asking them to collaborate with us and co-design research with us. So we think that's the best model and more likely to get good outcomes. I guess the big thing I would say is, again, in towards this mission of elevating mining work health and safety capabilities, is that we're focusing on solutions. While we do have a little bit of research that's digging into what the problem is, the majority of it is looking at developing, in collaboration with industry, solutions, often fairly novel, and exploring how effective these are in creating a difference in those really challenging areas. So that's what we're sort of really going about doing. So that was that's in a nutshell what we do.
No, it's a fascinating project, Tim, and it's interesting that you are building capability, particularly in the mining sector. And I guess, just stepping back, why do you think the mining sector specifically needs more work or more of a focus in this area than other sectors?
I think it's, good question. I do get asked that. And what I always say is, mining doesn't own these problems at all. Obviously I've worked in a great number of sectors, as have others in the team, and we're super aware that they're not problems that are unique to mining. And particularly, so mining has the sort of has a reputation for developing, at least in some areas, some fairly world-class ways to manage safety in the workplace. Health has always been an issue, not only in mining but everywhere else, and has often received less political interest because it's not such a headline grabber mostly. Same in New Zealand, where I spent most of my career. It took, health has often taken a back seat, and we were just making traction in New Zealand after many years of trying to get occupational health sort of established as a priority. It should be. And we, most of us know the statistics around that and how it should be a political priority. And then Pike River happened, and things pretty much shifted back to the safety front again. But we have moved on, and the same here. And now, of course, we have to confront psychosocial risks as well. And, of course, the psychosocial risks have always been there. Organisations are just formally, under legislation, expected to manage those in the way they would also manage physical risks, and that is where there isn't the same level of maturity in the mining sector or in many other areas of work. So we try and borrow from what we've learned in other areas as a starting point, but also understanding what the other research, such as the landmark studies, have shown us about psychosocial risks and the whole issue around respect at work as well. And try to think about those from a systems approach and looking at those success factors. And I know I'm moving myself on to a new answering a question you haven't answered yet, but I said we were looking at solutions. We're trying to make sure that everything we embed reflects those factors that have been shown to be successful in many studies where organisational interventions have been evaluated or formally evaluated. So we've got some idea of what those critical success factors will be for intervention. And, of course, they always involve participation, and we would expect. And majority of us would be pleased to hear that, but also know how challenging that is to do that really well. But they always involve fairly senior level support, because without that you're not going far. They need to be tailored and contextualised to the workplace setting or context. And there's a number of other success factors along similar lines that we have learned about in other research and through reviews and so on, trying to apply and to make sure our interventions that we're testing with the industry have these characteristics. So they need to affect, be broadly integrated across the organisation, not just focused in a very targeted area, that sort of thing. And having the participation of subject matter experts at whatever level, or across multi-levels across the organisation is fundamental. And, of course, they need to be multifaceted often as well. What we do know is just the things that we've done in the past, policy, training and awareness, and maybe in the case of interpersonal psychosocial risk, sort of reporting systems and so on, those things on their own aren't going to work. We've plateaued in what they're able to do. So we need to look at innovative ways to advance in whatever we're looking at. So that's what we're doing. And coming back to what you asked, they're not unique to mining. Mining does struggle with what we used to call the emerging risks, but now I think are pretty mainstream.
Established risks.
Established, yeah.
I think it's interesting because you've really touched on what human factors and ergonomics perspective is in terms of looking at the whole system and being multidisciplinary in your approach. How do you think an HFE perspective particularly helps to contribute to addressing the challenges which we've already discussed in the mining sector, and in all sectors, particularly when it comes to building capability in understanding psychosocial risks and how an organisation needs to be addressed rather than individuals?
For me, it does always just it starts and finishes really with the idea we look at. We understand that these things don't happen in a vacuum. People don't behave in a vacuum. They're part of a work system. And to try and understand any of these problems, let alone solve them, we do have to take that approach. And in doing so, taking that systems approach, we're often challenging a whole lot of established thinking about things. There's a huge wellbeing industry out there, for instance, wellness, wellbeing, who would have the focus on the individual. And their voices are often heard by organisations. It is extremely convenient to blame the worker. And I've always felt, and this isn't a political issue, this is a science fact for me, that we cannot understand risk just from the point of view of the individual. So taking that systems approach, this is what I learned in my education at Loughborough. First thing they taught me, I apply it always. And I enjoy working with other ergonomists because they pretty much always share a common perspective on workplace health and safety. And my supervisor was Professor Roger Haslam, who was a great guy, interesting guy, but a really good guy. And he instilled that in me from day one, and I've never, ever forgotten that. And I can't go into addressing any problem just from a sort of very narrow perspective. I just don't think it works. I think human factors often has a part to play as part of a multidisciplinary team, and that's exactly what's happening in Mars. I think it's not just because I'm the lead, and in fact, a lot of the projects I'm not the lead, but I do try and influence thinking to ensure that we're not narrowing the design and how we're understanding problems and how we're trying to address them. Because I just don't think we can bring about, real change. There's plenty of evidence that sort of narrowly focused interventions only have a short-term benefit, if at all, and don't remove the source of the risk. So really, for me, it's really about taking a risk-based approach from a systems perspective and putting the human at the centre of that. And that's always been what ergonomics is about. And it's a design discipline in the end, and human-centred design discipline. And we just keep that in our mind as we work with organisations in trying to design solutions. And to be fair, in this sector, I've had absolute, everyone has been very open to that sort of thinking. And not only the researchers I work with, but the people we're working with in the organisations understand that. So we make sure that, the great majority of our work is, looks across the work system, is systems-based and risk-based in our approach. And that, I think, will bring us to the results we're looking for, over time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know any other way that is more appropriate, but I do see an awful lot of other work going on that is very sort of individual level.
It's
and there's a place. There can be a place for that within a program of intervention where that's perhaps one part of it, but the analysis and work we've done and the systematic reviews and so on have shown that those things can only be effective when part of a organisational approach.
Absolutely.
To give you an example, we've got one study that's looking at workplace bullying and incivility, and what we're trying to do, and the whole purpose of it, is trying to shift organisations from an individual level perspective to an organisational level perspective, because that determines how they will look at the problem and address it. So they might be, and we use sort of capability type approaches for that. So they may be at a sort of very passive level or a reactive level of thinking about it, which is very much thinking of it as an interpersonal issue, as opposed to looking at it as a problem of the organisation and looking at it from a systems view. And so we're trying to move organisations up the ladder towards those more mature ways of thinking about it. And those things that could be applied to traditional safety or safety culture in the case of jury lab, can also be applied to psychosocial. So they're the sorts of things we're doing alongside some of the other interventions that look a bit different. But yeah.
Well, you're on the right side of history, really, if you think about it, because I love that you're looking at particularly, we look at incivilities and bullying has always been traditionally a human resource issue. It's to do with proving if something happened or not. Yes. And stepping back and using that systemic and human factors-based analysis to work out why is it occurring is really the base of our legislation as well. So it's risk-based.
Absolutely, and that's the other thing I should have said. We're trying to marry that up with it, and that we always, when we're talking about it, we're saying, and the other thing is doing it this way, we are actually in line with legislation.
Exactly. I'd love to know how you're using the FredT tool particularly and how that's helping with that capability building in mining.
The FredT tool was something that led by Carlo Caponecchia, Associate Professor Carlo at the University of New South Wales. He and I and a bunch of others developed this tool, and actually for general use, not for the mining sector. And since its development, it's pretty much sat there. We don't really have an idea of how much it's being used or how it's benefiting anyone. But I should say it's a tool for building work design capability or work redesign capability in addressing psychosocial risks. And what it basically does is, and it's designed to be used for people with a range of capabilities, not just for people schooled in work health and safety or work design, but people, the broader range of people who should, or who maybe or should be involved in work design in some one way or another. And it takes them through the steps, very much following that risk-based approach of identifying a risk scenario of some type and understand the context of your organisation and how that risk is affecting, the people in the organisation, and then basically developing solutions. So it's very much the traditional risk management model, but built into this system. It really steps you through. Our view is that there is a place for this in the mining sector because it's the one thing we're osmosis about. It's all right talking about work design, and a lot of people are talking about that and where it's lacking and how it should, and why we should use it. But the actual how to isn't really there. For instance, we know in the codes of practice that talk about the need for work design, job design, and as a way of managing the psychosocial hazards. But there's very little guidance in actually how to, really hands-on guidance. So this is, the idea is to evaluate how this works as a standalone support. It's not just a tool, there's a whole set of resources that come with it, including cases and a work example and links to all manner of different resources. We're going to test it in a number of different mining organisations, and then we're going to talk about what we find in terms of a relatively short-term evaluation that'll look at the usability of it, the ability of people to actually come up with actions that will address the risks they've identified, and do a basic process evaluation to understand, what works about it, what doesn't work and could be improved, and how does it fit with the context of the mining industry. Along with all the other research studies we're doing, we'll be presenting this stuff at a showcase event in November, on 20th of November, that the Minister's going to speak at. To the industry and others who are interested in how work health and safety can be addressed in mining. But I'm sure it's got a wider interest to people outside of mining. For instance, FredT has not been tested elsewhere, formally evaluated elsewhere. So this pilot evaluation we're doing is actually valuable beyond mining, in my view. But it does need to happen elsewhere as well. It's one of those tools that has the double benefit of hopefully lifting the capability of people who use it in work redesign, but also actually giving people a tool for addressing psychosocial factors or hazards. So that's its purpose. Let's see how well it works.
Yeah.
We obviously all like it. We recognise it can seem simplistic to people who have a strong understanding of this area, but for others, it could be a really useful tool, and we're looking to see if it hits a sweet spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely a need that I've seen out in industry for how do we find competency? How do we find people who can do a psychosocial risk assessment? So anything that can simplify it would be helpful.
That's what it aims to do.
Now, if we have anyone listening from the mining sector who wants to get involved in that, how would they do that, Tim? Would they?
Oh, yes. They could email myself, t.bentley@ecu.edu.au. They could, if you don't want to do that, you can jump on the website and you'll find the email address and phone number of the Mars Centre. And you can, so if you Google ECU Mars Centre, you can see more about what we do and what we're about. Website, as ever, lags a bit behind what we're really doing, but we try to keep it moving in the right direction. You'll also see various LinkedIn posts and so on, but we're certainly looking for more organisations to participate in that study. So I would love to hear from anyone in the mining sector who would be interested in that.
Yeah, that's great to know. I know there's, as I said, there's definitely a need out there. I'm interested, you talked a little bit about some of those key challenges with the Mars program, and I know that, with the using tools like FredT and also with your work in engaging with industry, how do you see is the best way that we can address those sort of challenges, particularly if we look at some of the risks, say, with digital advancements, how we monitor incident injury risks? How is how can we map those challenges with what Mars is able to do in their program?
Well, we can't do everything. That's the first thing to say. But what we can do is try and prioritise, and we've actually come up with a short list of our own, what we think industry are telling us the key challenges within those three areas I mentioned earlier. We believe one of them is to better understand those cultural and structural factors that are influencing the high levels of psychosocial risks, and particularly workplace bullying and workplace sexual harassment that are seen in the industry. So we're really interested in digging into those a bit. And this is our research that's less about intervention and more about looking beneath the surface and trying to understand at a deeper level what's going on there. The second thing is there simply isn't enough knowledge about what works in the industry in terms of solutions to the problems we've talked about. So another one about key areas that we're looking at, key set of challenges, is to understand what works in the sector in terms of managing psychosocial risks in particular. And we'll be looking at that. Then another one is around, a lot is spoken about the future of work. And in many ways, a lot of what I set up the Future Work program in New Zealand as part of the New Zealand Work Research Institute, and we liaised with government there, or actually they were in opposition then just before they came into government with the Labour Party, around developing a set of white papers on the future of work, and obviously the Labour Party were looking at it very much from a worker perspective, as you would expect, but doing this work gave me a really sort of early insight into the broad range of issues that will affect our organisations and the workers that work with them in the future. And the ones, obviously, that are talked about all the time are around automation and increasingly, of course, new ways of working since COVID. These are areas we were working in years before COVID happened. And, of course, now the predictions that we made about the level of, working from home, remote working, the role of automation and how that changes the nature of work has really advanced. And, our actual original estimates are now proving to be inadequate. It's actually a bigger change than we thought. For me, amongst all that stuff, the biggest challenges we need to understand is what happens. It's not really about automation and the risk to jobs and those sorts of things. It's more about what's the quality of work going to be like? And I think that's a real human factors question. What's the quality of work? What's left once you automate these bits? What's the quality of work going to look like? And are we actually going to ensure by design that it's of high quality. I did write a paper that was published in Ergonomics on this very issue, and actually concluded with that point. And one of my co-authors, Roger Haslam, is a sort of strong advocate around quality of work. Yeah. We really wanted to get that in there, and I think as ergonomists, that was the sort of the biggest sort of takeaway for me is all this stuff is happening. Workers are aging. We have multi-generational workforces. We have, automation taking us into, not just automation, obviously, but advanced technology taking us into places we never knew we would go, and people working in quite different ways and much more distributed, in a distributed way. And that affects the nature and experience of work, the quality of work for me. So the number one issue is what will the quality of work be when those are done? And that's a role that I think human factors has and ergonomics has, and should be involved in that thinking. Not just thinking about what these changes would be. They're going to happen anyway. We can't greatly influence that, but what we can influence, hopefully, is what work looks like once those things have happened. So that's sort of something we're going to try and do. At the moment, we've only got just 2 studies going on in this future work area. One is just looking at the influence of automation and new technology on psychosocial risks, and that has started with a systematic review. That work's being done at the moment, and I've actually got a meeting about that this afternoon. But that's soon to be concluded, and off the back of that, we will consider what the next steps would be. A second piece of work that I'm planning to do early next year with a futurist who's actually a adjunct professor with our school, and we work with him a bit, he's actually an adjunct professor, so I'll call him Professor Ben Harmer, and he's quite a sort of well-known futurist in Australia, and used to work for PwC, but he's now on his own, and he really has a good relationship with industry and a strong understanding of all these different, future of work forces and mega trends that are going to affect work in the future. And so we're going to work with him to try and understand what the mining industry will look like in the future, and as a first part, and then a second part, we will work with people from work, health and safety and HR, etc., to try and understand how we can design work with that in mind to make it more healthy and safe. So for me, that's sort of the most important work we can probably do, given we can't do everything.
Yeah.
So
really looking forward to seeing the research on that. I think the consideration of how automation will affect us in terms of our quality and like you say, with psychosocial risks, they tend to be considered secondary after this automation's put in place. We think all the safety and health benefits, we don't really consider potentially what they will look like on a person's experience at work and the work experience.
Right. So, I mean, you can think of some immediately, of course. People will most likely work in a more distributed way. Then probably their roles will involve more sort of monitoring and some of those sort of vigilance things that people aren't very good at.
Yes.
And there's a whole lot, and of course these things won't only affect psychosocially, but also, affect actually safety risk associated with these and the likelihood of error and so on. I'm really hoping that all this is in the planning. But I suspect, as ever, that technology is moving far faster than the people side of the equation. Yes. So we just have to keep that in mind, and that's why we're trying to do our little bit. But it is a bit of a call to other people working in our field to be thinking about this as a human factors problem, and what will the jobs of the future look like, and how can we make sure they're healthy and safe and satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to double back, if we can, a bit, Tim, about the projects that you are undertaking. And you mentioned they've got 9 ongoing at the moment. Yeah. Can you talk us through maybe one of them and what you're looking to achieve with the particular project that you're undertaking?
Okay. I'm trying to which one to pick. Right, we've talked about Fred T, so we'll leave him sitting there. I've mentioned a bit about the workplace bullying and harassment one. It's a similar project where we're evaluating a capability maturity tool that's there to advance the culture of the organisation and its people and systems towards considering these issues from an organisational perspective and integrated across the work system. What else are we doing? Okay, I said we weren't doing much at the individual level at all, but there is a great project that's just actually been completed around belonging, team belonging. The FIFO workers work on their own, work in some isolation from their family support in quite a harsh environment, working long hours. We know that they're overrepresented in the mental health statistics, of course. We know that they don't always get the right sorts of support. I'm just thinking from a conservation of resources point of view. When you lose an important resource like that of your family, and you're in a demanding role where there are those psychosocial risks, feeling a long way from the support that can help you, I guess, balance those demands that you face. We've just done a small project looking at whether team belongingness can actually enhance, can actually not replace that family support, but be another resource for and help relieve wellbeing. And just in a cross-sectional study, using surveys, but also a lot of interviews, I did 50 interviews just at one site. We've really dug into the relationship between team belonging and that sense of having the belonging and support of your team around you, and how that influences people's mental health and well-being, and what other factors impact on that. So that's an example of a study that's a bit different to the ones we've talked about up to now, but I still think important. And as I say, intervention should be multifaceted. And for me, that could well be a fairly novel way, and this hasn't been looked at in before in the sector, a fairly novel way of thinking about how can you enhance wellbeing.
That's so true. We've done a lot of work on risk factors. Yes. We often forget to look at those mitigating factors, the things that can actually address those risks. And so I guess this project is looking at how to enhance the factors which could actually address those risks of isolation, work demands, things like that.
The intent is to actually try and create some sort of belonging as a result. Some sort of intervention as a resource to uplift that belonging and therefore help people cope with that suboptimal work environment and living environment that they experience. There's a couple of other things I'll mention briefly. One is we've got a fair amount of work in that diversity inclusion space. Yeah. For me, we know those underpinning factors. We're less interested in the symptoms of the problem, the bullying, the incivility, the harassment, the sexual harassment, etc., and more interested in the underlying conditions that affect that. And of course, we know gender inequality, we know highly masculine, hyper-masculine industry or culture in the industry, and a number of other factors have sort of underlie those risks. And for us, it's more important to look at those and see what can be done to shift the cultural dial on those. So we've got a really great study being led by Dr. Judy Lundy, who's a member of our centre along with her team, who's looking at developing, they'd already developed a maturity capability model outside of mining, and they're actually testing this in mining, and there's been a real appetite for this. I think in the industry they realise we're not really getting to grips with the whole diversity and inclusion thing. We're aware of it's an issue, but there's a real lack of, for instance, inclusive leadership in the industry. And we really do need that if you want to shift the dial in this area. And so this study is looking to advance the diversity and inclusion culture and environment in organisations. So that one is currently in evaluation now, and we're going to be really excited to be talking about that. And that obviously, relates to the other stuff we're doing. It's a joined up sort of approach. How does the underlying culture influence the behaviours we're seeing? There's a couple of studies looking at using big data supplied by DMIRS to understand firstly, how organisations their effectiveness in managing incidents and the cost of those incidents, and some of the health impacts as well. So Associate Professor Marcus Catani is leading that research. And I say that's working with an absolutely massive data set and should give us really good intelligence and should be able to inform industry about how they're going in that respect and become part of the wider barometer that we're developing. Another one is being led by a colleague of Marcus, although Marcus is strongly involved, around the occupational epidemiology sort of indicators and sort of mapping exposure with real-world outcomes, again using a very large data sample. So these are sort of slightly different projects to the ones I've spoken about. They're going to be longitudinal. It's going to really inform us going forward. We're also going to have the other part of our Miles Barometer will actually look at PSC, psychosocial safety climate, and a number of other variables in a small data set going forward where we hopefully will get wide engagement from industry, and so we can really understand those sort of psychosocial risks and how they're being managed, and how PSC, which we know is an incredibly powerful predictor of wellbeing outcomes, how that is being built in the industry. And we're actually going to work with Professor Maureen Dollard, who is, I can see you're aware of Maureen. Maureen's a great friend, and we've worked with her before, and she obviously developed the whole concept of PSC, and we've been doing some work outside of Miles, prior to Miles, in trying to develop interventions, including one that we rolled out in New Zealand, the Health Research Council study. So we're going to be working with Maureen about seeing how PSC interventions can work with the sector. Great. Absolutely it is. And you know, having that top leadership commitment and prioritisation of psychological health and safety, we've already talked about it. It's a fundamental part of the puzzle. Maureen and colleagues have always claimed that PSC is the ultimate antecedent, you know, the cause of the causes. Let's see how it works as an intervention in the sector, but we'll also keep a track of it in terms of, you know, empirically understanding how PSC statistically develops in the sector. And so that's something else we're going to be doing. And I think that's going to be absolutely fundamental. That work starting the second half of this year.
I can see it being really effective, Tim, because I think with PSC, from what I know and from Maureen's work, it really talks about how one can measure these things, which we always thought were immeasurable, and that you can actually, once you have achievables and targets, we know that the mining sector really love those sorts of things particularly. I'd love to see how the impact that could have.
We are, and so that'll be part of the barometer.
Yeah.
So we'll have the health data and the epidemiologic data, and we'll have PSC and a number of other indicators that relate to that. And then we'll have the two capability maturity models as well. So there's a whole lot of data that any organisation participating can engage with, and they'll be able to obviously benchmark and see how they sit against the rest of the industry. We've got to do something like this if we want to move it forward. Yeah. And we'll have an amazing, if it all goes to plan, and I hope and pray it does, we'll have amazing central resource from which to, be able to speak with some confidence about the state of the industry and how things are advancing in various areas, whether it be diversity, you know, PSC, diversity inclusion, the ability to manage workplace bullying and incivility, about how we're dealing with, managing incidents and the quality of that. The other thing that influences us is the thinking of Professor Michael Quinlan. And so Michael has also been working with Dominius and doing his 10 Pathways to Death and Destruction, that cheery bedtime reading, which, of course, tells us about those 10 pathways that seem to be common amongst many fatal and, catastrophic incidents in mining sector globally. And Marcus actually, he's an adjunct professor with our centre, but he's also, he came along and did a keynote address for us to industry about that on the back of the great work he's been doing with Demir's going round in his roadshow talking about it. I think the whole of industry really has an understanding of Michael's point of view on this, and we're kind of really looking to piggyback on that. And actually Marcus Catani has been doing a survey since Michael started doing these way back, and looking at how the industry is advancing on those 10 indicators. They're not. It's pretty flat. So Marcus can tell you more about that. Yeah. But in the end, again, that's another sort of indicator of how we're doing against these critical, I guess, sort of predictive factors for fatalities and catastrophes in the sector. Pretty important stuff. And so that's another line of inquiry that we're sort of dabbling with. Yeah. As you can tell, there's a lot going on. And the key to us is how can we feed this all into short courses we develop, into our teaching, into our grad cert. So everyone that goes through that will become part of the Mars alumni, and they will go back to their organisations, hopefully having a better grasp of all these things. And as this research all matures over the years, we'll be feeding it into those programs to really enrich them. Now that's how the sort of cycle works. It's a bit of a ecosystem. We engage with industry, understand the problems, we do the research, we embed that into the teaching, and then we engage with the alumni as they finish, their experience with us, keeping them in the loop, keeping their continuing professional development, but also allowing us to continue to learn from them as what's their experience going back to their organisations and trying to implement some of this stuff that they've learned. So I'm really pleased with how this is all set up. Yeah. It's still to be seen how it will all work out in the end. At the moment, we have another 2 years on our contract. I'm super hoping it's extended. I guess that will depend on who's in government and a whole bunch of stuff outside of our influence, but it's certainly my hope that this really matures into a program that gives really good intelligence to the industry, and develops great solutions and innovations that wouldn't have probably otherwise arisen from traditional sorts of ways of thinking about work health and safety.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. I really appreciated you going through, what we're doing at the Mars Centre. And I guess I'd love to leave on a philosophical question on where do you see, you've mentioned that the program technically finishes in a couple of years. The graduate certificate is a big thing that's moving forward. Where do you see the industry being in, say, 5 years' time? And we've talked about this a little bit with some of the future of work and futurism, but do you see that this is going to be something we'll look back and go, do you remember the time that we didn't know how to do a psychosocial risk assessment? Or do you think that this is going to be an ongoing issue?
No, I think we'll get there. I don't know, because I think everyone is pulling in the same direction. Yeah. It's not just us by any stretch. Of course, there's the wider Mars program with all manner of initiatives going on, and we're just part of that. We're part of that ecosystem, and we can only play our part. But if we play our part well and those other initiatives do the same thing and we all pull together with that industry commitment that I think was clearly stated in the Driving Respect event last year, for me, if we work together, we have that commitment from the top of the organisation and we can actually manage to see that flow through to the coalface, down through the levels to make sure that everyone has a common understanding of how we need to think about these problems and how we need to go about addressing them, then I think things will improve. I think that definitely culturally there needs to be a shift. And so we're really focusing on what part can we play in helping that happen and how can we help measure to see how well that's happening. And then I think, obviously capabilities need to advance, and I guess we're all about that. And trying to shift things a bit out of just the remit of HR and more into the remit of work health and safety and thinking from a risk-based view. I think we'll be in a much better place in 5 years. I think we'll be grappling with new challenges, actually. I don't think we're just in the same way we've never really 100% dealt with the problem of safety and critical risk. There will always be things that slip through the net or through the cheese holes or whatever, but it'll be the same with psychosocial. But I think we will advance. I think there's serious awareness now of needing to advance, and even the most reluctant organisations are having little choice but be caught on this sort of wave of movement as we have to take psychosocial risks. Think about it in the same way as physical risks. I have more concerns about occupational health, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
But there's so many things we don't really understand. We can barely measure, and I mean, it's not my area, and I shouldn't speak too much about things I don't understand. But I imagine that we're going to have a lot of new challenges. Let's just take radiation as one example.
Yeah.
And so, while that's not my area, I'm reliably told by my colleagues who work in that area that those things will remain a big risk. Yeah. I think psychosocial will continue to be, and I think probably we'll start, and I'm hoping we'll start thinking about them in a less siloed way.
Yeah.
It's not health and safety and psychosocial. Let's think about them. Yeah. If we can start thinking about more in the same way, bring it all into the remit of work health and safety, and have human factors and ergonomics play a big part, as I say, what the future of mining work health and safety looks like, and the future of work in terms of the jobs that people do and the risks they face and the quality of their work, then I think we've got somewhere. So I've got no crystal ball. I don't actually know, but I do know we have a plan. We've got some clear objectives and a clear mission, and we'll be doing lots to sort of try and examine and measure how well that mission is being advanced.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tim. That was really well put, and I really appreciated your time today talking us through this. Thank you.
Thanks, Kath. Thanks for your interest.
Thanks for joining us at the Human Factors and Ergonomics Hub, brought to you by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society of Australia, where human-centred design really matters. If you like this podcast, make us your favourite in your podcast app. We look forward to chatting with you next time.